My name is Jim. I'm an alcoholic. And this meeting is an hour and a half in length, and we do take a 10-minute break at the halfway point, so everybody can kind of kick back and relax. And we're studying the big book together, and today we're going to complete our study of the 9th chapter and probably get started with the 10th chapter. We'll see. And the primary purpose of an Alcoholics Anonymous group and meeting is the teaching and practice of the 12 steps. And one of the things that we do in this group as we go through the big book together is we tie everything back constantly to the steps so that we see how they apply. Now then, do we have anyone here today who's been out improving their resume or doing further intensive research and just coming back? I'd like to give us your first name, please. Anyone who's... Oh, yes, ma'am.
My name is Dawn. I'm an alcoholic. This is my second day back.
Second day? Good. Is it Dora?
Dawn, like the morning time.
Oh, Dawn. Oh, where are you from? What part of New York?
You got it? Queens.
Queens. Okay, I thought I recognized that. Somewhere up there around LaGuardia Airport, right? Okay.
Welcome. Thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you here. And you had some time in grade before, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I had 5 years sober. Moved down to Florida.
Uh-oh, that was a mistake right there. Yeah.
Your meetings weren't the right kind of meetings down here. You
Oh,
know, y'all
right.
do it wrong. New York does it right. So I stopped going to meetings and I started drinking. And I kept trying to come back. And I put like 3 days under my belt here. Then my sponsor had other obligations. How dare she? And
Yeah.
I went and got drunk again. I used it as an excuse.
Sure. That makes
And,
sense, yeah.
You know, there's a lot of excuses for no reason.
Exactly.
And I completed steps 1, 2, and 3
Good.
in like a moment, because I said I was going to come back the next day, and I called my sponsor. I said I'm going to come with you to the 12:30 meeting yesterday. So I want to have my last hurrah and get as drunk as I could.
What is that last hurrah now? What was that?
That was get as drunk as I could.
Oh, okay. We just want to be
And
sure. Yeah.
I ended up passing out in the chair and having to have my son see that again. And he said, I brought you down a blanket last night when you passed out. I helped you to the couch and covered you. And in that moment, I knew, yes, my life is unmanageable. No human power could relieve me from this because I have tried on my own. And only God could restore me to sanity. And as I was driving here, there was a song playing, and it says, the song is God and I'm not. God is God and I'm man. I only understand a part. And so I think that brought to mind my pride. So actually, I'm starting work on my 4th step, starting to recognize my defects of character, which is pride. Because when I was coming before, I was like, well, 3 meetings a week is okay. You know, I didn't do 90 and 90. Well, you know what? Even on the way here, I was thinking, well, when I go to church on Sunday, I shouldn't have to go to a meeting. You know, like this sick thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to follow everything. I sat down and thought, what worked for me the first time? And what worked for me the first time was giving myself up completely.
Sure.
Knowing I couldn't do it. So I'm really, really grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to God for allowing me to come back.
Good.
And I'm grateful for your meeting.
Well, yeah, thank you, God. That, you know, one thing to keep in mind on, you don't have to go to meetings, you get to go to meetings. It's a big difference. It's a miracle. We're here for you. You get to come in here and we get to help you recover if you'll let us. Really glad you're here. Anybody who's brand new, just getting here for the first time, may be scared to death, wondering what the hell you're doing here and what's going on. We need to have your first name so we can leap all over you after the meeting. Not really. Only 2 or 3 of us. If you know, maybe even not a mob scene. Nobody new? Nobody's admitting to being new. All right. Let's see. We have anybody here who's visiting with us today and wonders whether they walked into an AA meeting or something else? We're not a very conventional group. We like to do things as they appear to us. We're a stream of consciousness bunch, which makes it kind of interesting most of the time.
Can I just say something?
You may. We know you're going to anyway, so go ahead.
It's my 11th day clean and sober now.
Wonderful.
This last relapse, I'm realizing that it's not my job, my husband, my home that I could have lost, that I could have died on this last relapse of what I was doing. I could have lost my life.
Yep.
I didn't. And I'm glad to be here.
We're really glad you are, too. Just keep asking questions and keep doing what the big book tells you to do. I'm going to promise you something. If you follow the direction of the big book, work the steps, and you keep doing it, you're going to be just fine. The rest of your life. That's all you got to know. Just do it. Open your books up, please, to page 132. We're going to just take a quick look backwards here. Remind ourselves of a couple of things. If you haven't been with us before, we're studying the big book together, and we're in the 9th chapter, Family Afterward, which is a chapter of enormous importance and seldom recognized as such because so many people don't feel that there's any necessity to worry about a family that either doesn't exist or has forsaken them, or that's just not important anyway. Well, just the opposite is true. As with every other part of the big book, there are passages in this chapter which are of enormous significance to the recovering alcoholic, because that's what this chapter really is about. And that's one of the reasons it's so important for us to keep it in mind and to study it when we have the opportunity. Because it's really talking about us and our relationships with our families, and our families' relationships with us inter se. And there's a great appeal in this chapter for the family to begin to follow the same spiritual course that we follow, all of which is quite historical in concept, because they found that was really important in those early days before the big book was written. The family had been seriously damaged by us. The family was sick as we were, but in most cases they didn't drink about it. But it became clear that the family needed the same kind of spiritual help that we did. And the appeal here is to family to make the effort to and join in with us in a spiritual recovery. However, for purposes of this meeting and most AA groups, the discussions in this chapter, which revolve around the recovering alcoholic and what the heck's going on with us, are critically important, and we need to be quite aware of what they're saying. And much of what's in this chapter is repeated around the rooms without any particular reference to where it comes from. Let's look at this on page 132. The middle paragraph, beginning just about a third of the way down the page. We've been speaking to you of serious, sometimes tragic things. We've been dealing with alcohol in its worst aspect. But we aren't a glum lot. Everybody know what glum means? Gloomy, depressed, bitch, moan, complain, and all that stuff? Okay. God, you hear enough of that, don't you? If newcomers could see no joy or fun in our existence, they wouldn't want it. I love this sentence. We absolutely insist upon enjoying life. Now, what's wrong with that? Is that some kind of heresy against the tragic circumstances in which we find ourselves? I don't think so. I think it should be our credo, our motto. It doesn't mean having softball tournaments every week and bingo parties every week, and doesn't mean that we bring in coochie dancers on Wednesday nights and anything like that. We don't have to have a stand-up comedian. It's not that kind of enjoying life. What it means is that we concentrate our efforts and our thinking and our discussions and our meetings around recovery. And when we do that, what we're really involving ourselves in is our heritage. And our heritage is that we be happy, joyous, and free. Let's take a look at top of page 133. Next page. We are sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. What in the world does that mean? I think pretty clear that this is God's will for us, that we be happy, joyous, and free. That's what He wants for us. But we have to earn it. It's automatically ours if we do the work, and it is never ours if we don't. And one of the sad things, about so much of New Age AA is that it misses this point. That really we ought to be doing the work that is recommended or suggested or set forth in various publications and treaties, which is handed down from sponsor to sponsor these days, unfortunately, which does not have any concentration on the steps, or at least not the steps as they're written, but is really concentrating on the human solutions and the application of a non-existent willpower. But when we take the big book as it is set out, and we understand that it is a history, that it is reciting to us precisely what the people who wrote the book did in order to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and we begin to take that doggone seriously, that it means exactly what it says. This is the way we do it. Why do we say that? Because we did it and it worked for us, and we sincerely believe if you follow these same directions it'll work for you. And they were right. Absolutely right. It does work. And when we follow the directions in the big book, when we work the steps and we throw aside the 12 and 12 and the living sober and all that other stuff out there, we just pick up the book, follow the directions in the book, what happens is that automatically, eventually, we arrive at a place of happiness, joyousness, and freedom. It is automatic. If you stop thinking about it, guys, if we had to philosophize our way through all this stuff, or think our way through it, or make up stuff as we go along, which is what people do who follow the 12 and 12, because there's nothing in there about how to work the steps. Make it all up as you go. When we don't do that, when we take the directions and follow them, the big book tells us that the results are automatic. If you have doubt that, take a look at the so-called promises. The promises turn out to be nothing more nor less than the inevitable result of working the steps. We're going to have those promises, I suppose, whether we want them or not. They're just coming. The relief from the insanity, the alcoholic insanity of taking that first drink, knowing what the consequences are going to be. That relief, being restored to sanity. The big book calls it automatic. Automatic means simply that we've done the work as it is prescribed and set forth in the big book, and automatically we receive this blessing, this great miracle, that the problem of alcoholism is solved for us. It does not exist, it tells us. It doesn't, it's gone. And how are we going to get that? How are we going to get this happiness, joyousness, and freedom? Why don't we pick up this book and believe what it's telling us? This is what they did. This is what happened. Why would we go anywhere else? Of course, it's quite common for us to try to find the easier, softer way. And many times we're new and we don't know what's going on, and somebody who purports to have great wisdom and knowledge and strength and time and grade around here will tell us we have to do it this way, and we don't know any different. I urge everybody, pick up the book and read it. Understand what it's saying to you. In the very first page, the foreword to the first edition, in the first couple of sentences, it tells you this: that we are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this volume. And when we understand that, and we understand we're reading a book which is a history of recovery, of real life people who did recover and who wrote about it and told us how they did so, then we begin to understand how important it is to put aside all this garbage that's out there that does not work. It certainly is not demonstrated to work. And remember that the people who have come before us now number in the millions who have recovered. I could say in 1940, when the book first came out, that one doubting Thomas would have perhaps a lot of reason to wonder, do these people know what the hell they're talking about? Today, 2003, millions of recoveries later, all over the world, 140 different countries, translated into 30 different languages, millions of recoveries later. What more do we need to know? So if you're new, or if you're floundering, please pick up the book and read it and do what it tells you to do. I promise you, you'll be just fine. So you get to be happy, joyous, and free. People say, what's God's will for me? How am I supposed to know that? Well, depends on what the context of that question is. If the question means, does God want me to go to the supermarket today or not, probably can't answer that. Maybe can, who knows? But if it's talking about what does God expect of me in my life, we know the answer to that. Let's see if we can tie these two things together. Let's go back to page 76, please. Let's just see how or 77, I beg your pardon, 77, right at the top of the page. Let's see how these two things tie together. At the moment, this is the new person now, at the moment we are trying to put our lives in order. But this is not an end in itself. And here it comes. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. That's why we're here. And that's what our purpose is. If I pick up this book and I wonder, why do I have to do all this stuff? Well, first of all, I have to do it because I have a purpose for once in my life. I've got a reason for living. And that purpose is to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the people about me. Then if we are really talking in self terms, we say, well, what's in it for me? I get to be happy, joyous, and free, which I have never been. And of the three, the most wonderful is free. Freedom from self. That's where it all comes down to. Freedom from the bondage of self. Think about it. If you haven't arrived there yet, your spirit gets to soar with the angels. You get to be free of self. And so that's what's waiting for us. Now at the bottom of page 133. Oh, wait a second. There are a couple more things here on the top of page 133. I forgot. Let's go on with the next couple of sentences, because there's some other really profound stuff here that we have to understand, and we need to accept. We cannot subscribe to the belief that this life is a vale of tears. That means presently, as we sit. Though it once was just that for many of us. But it is clear that we made our own misery. God didn't do it. And so, when we read that, we hark back to what we learned in the third step. That our problems were our own making. That they arose out of ourselves. That the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. And above everything, we have to be rid of this selfishness that'll kill us. Even back as far as into the second chapter, when we're thinking in terms of the second step. Faced with a self-imposed crisis, it tells us. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is or He is not. Either God is everything or He's nothing. What's a self-imposed crisis? I just graduated from a 3-month stint in a treatment center, and everything that they taught me there indicated just the opposite. That I'm not responsible because it was a dysfunctional family that was responsible. It was all this mistreatment I had as a child forward, which I never even thought of before, but they made me remember it. That I've got some kind of a salt imbalance. That I've never learned to handle my emotions or my feelings. And I've got to understand that I am entitled to my feelings. I got to understand that I'm only as sick as my secrets. I got to spill everything. I got to sit in the center of a circle and everybody pick on me, and I got to learn how to deal with that. Balderdash. You see, all that's the best, well-meaning to the nth degree, I'm sure. But the problem is that you and I have a spiritual disease. That's our problem. Our problem is that we're powerless. And we always tried to capture power. We tried to run our lives based on self and self-will. And it didn't work. That's the essence of the third step, isn't it, Don? In the third step, what did we learn? That we have been trying to play God all our lives and it didn't work. We had to quit it. It didn't work. And therefore, as a result, we then decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God's going to be the director. He is the principal. We are His agent. He is the Father. We are His child. And therefore, we made up our minds to turn our lives and will over to Him. Why? Because we couldn't, there was no way that we could successfully run our own lives. And we found out that that was true. Now then, if I'm going to accept the human solution principles that everything relates back to childhood to adulthood, that there are reasons for my drinking, reasons for my crapped out behavior, and I love those reasons because they excuse me from any responsibility, that I'm sick, and that the only way that I can really get any help is to take about 7 different pills. And if I get zombie eyes to the nth degree, I'm not going to cause anybody any trouble for a long time. I don't mean to be too rough about it, but I've got to tell you that I've been doing this stuff for over 38 years, and I get to work with newcomers all the time. And I know that when the human solution is applied or tried to be applied to a spiritual disease, it doesn't work. And what it really does is confuse the issue tremendously. We'll grasp onto anything that gives us an excuse, and that the big book is making it quite clear, isn't it? We're faced initially with a self-imposed crisis. We can no longer ignore or evade. And here it tells us quite clearly, that we made our own misery. And God didn't do it. And how many times, a lot of you have been around a long, long time, I know, and there's a ton of sobriety in here. How many times have you heard people come in, newcomers especially, and say, I'm mad at God? What in the hell are you mad at God about? Well, I did this and this and this, and look what happened to me. It must have been his fault. You have no responsibility? Well, God must have done it, and I didn't. I'm just the innocent bystander. I'm the victim in life. I've been told this now for the last 3 months. I'm just a bloody victim around here. Now let me tell you in the next hour my whole story about how I have been victimized. But wait a second. Wouldn't it be nice if there was some way to get out of this hole? Wouldn't it be nice if there was some way that you could begin a real recovery? Well, yes, but how do I do that? Well, look, we got these 12 steps, see? Now, these things aren't easy. They're pretty simple, but they're not easy. Got to ask you a question. Do you think that you have the willingness and the capability of being truly honest with yourself? I know you do. And if you can do that, then you're going to be just fine, because then you can work the steps. You see, this is the reason so many people don't make it. This program is not for sissies. This program doesn't work for people who are unwilling or unable to face themselves. Because that's what it requires. We have to eventually get down and dirty and dead honest with ourselves. And then we have to learn to stay that way. And we take inventory every day to make sure that we do. That's why the big book, when it starts right out in chapter 5, and Elizabeth read it tonight, this afternoon, those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. So you see what the bottom line is? We say, oh, this is an honest program. Well, the truth of the matter is, it's a program which requires self-honesty and a great lack of self-delusion. Because that's been one of our greatest survival techniques. We could delude ourselves into believing any damn thing we wanted. As long as we could escape the feelings of shame and remorse and guilt and terror and bewilderment, frustration and despair. Just let me, turn me loose. Let me figure out why I'm not responsible for this. Let me figure out why I am again and again and again the victim. It's not my fault. You see, nobody recovers from alcoholism. Just one minute. Let me finish my thought. Okay. It's a stream of consciousness. You know about that, right? Nobody recovers who is not able to face themselves. Now, there's a wonderful remedy for that inability. It's the same remedy that we have when we have difficulty with the concept of a higher power. Simple. We ask God for the willingness to face ourselves. And we get it. Every time we ask God for the willingness to do something that's going to help us, we get it. Now, Sharon.
I remember reading about victimhood or victimdom, and Thomas More has said that a person that plays the role of a victim achieves a moral higher ground without spiritually developing.
Wow. Woo! Man, I like that. The moral high ground without any spiritual development. And of course that would be true, wouldn't it? Because by doing that, reaching the moral high ground, we haven't addressed the problem at all.
And no one's going to address it because we...
Yeah, sure. And no one's... And yeah, because if I can convince you that I'm such a poor, sad sack that's been so beaten up and beaten around and so deprived of every emotional benefit and all this other stuff that goes into making up the integrated, wonderful person I'm supposed to be, and you're going to say, good dog, poor baby, oh gosh, I understand. You say, wow, I got it made. You know. That's all I got to do. And son of a gun, they buy it. It's amazing too how often they buy it around these rooms. I was a victim myself of an AA talk the other night, which from the very beginning to the very end was nothing but a catechism of the sins of others. I thought, what in the world's going on here? This lady isn't recovering at all. And she's still walking around with untreated alcoholism, sick as a dog, and doesn't know it. But because somebody has convinced her that if she doesn't get up here and spill her guts all over the floor here and make everybody else here miserable and unhappy, she's not going to recover. Total nonsense. Balderdash, yes, dear.
How does a young kid entering this program, 17, 18, 19, because I see quite a few, how are they supposed to do what you just said when they can't take responsibility for most of their lives because they have not been the responsible ones? Supposedly their parents or guardians have, and the parents or guardians have done them terrible wrong. And that's all they've known. And they haven't developed emotionally yet to even understand.
Would you care to elucidate on this? Just let me. No. Let me ask you a question. When you see 30 and 40-year-old people walking in the door, are you assuming that they are emotionally developed?
No, I'm not emotionally developed, and I'm 43.
Yeah. Would you say that we have a bunch of babies around here when they first come in? I know I was. It's kindergarten, guys. You know, when you're a sponsor and you're working a lot of new people, it's like being a playground monitor. And you got to watch that sand pile because they're going to throw sand in each other's faces. They're great big grown-up people with all of the facade of grown-upness, and perhaps have assumed a lot of responsibility. But remember that responsibility was granted to them. And for the most part, the people walking the door have already stumbled and fallen greatly in living up to their responsibility. So it's pretty hard to say that they're responsible people. Well, it's no big deal. I took a little girl through the steps years ago who was 8 years old. She was a full-blown alcoholic. Their parents had been giving her booze since she was teething to keep her quiet. And now she has 25 years of sobriety. And she's 33 years old. And she is a leading light out in California. Now, so I know that the steps work for everybody, and it doesn't really make a particle difference how old or how young they are. What matters is you've got to find a sponsor who knows what the hell he or she's doing. Because there's so much baloney out there now. The tendency now with modern sponsors would be to take this little girl under their wing, mother her, make her dependent upon them, and not allow her or urge her or show her how to grow, so that she could begin to take responsibility for her own life. You say, well, 8, 9 years old, how can you do that? You can. How many kids that are orphans learn by the time they're 7, 8 years old to be they're thinking and acting just like 16, 17-year-olds because they had to. So we're going to help people become responsible no matter what their age, if we can, because nothing else works. Dependency is absolutely the killer, the absolute killer. Dependency has to be on God, not on any human being. And so that's one of the things we struggle with as sponsors, to try to foster this dependency on God and letting go of the dependencies on others, on human beings. Because they're always going to let us down. Not because they're bad people, just because that's the way the nature of the beast. And every time you have an expectation of somebody else which is unarticulated, and all your bright-eyed friends say, oh, sure, that's what he ought to do, and it invariably going to let you down. Invariably. You're going to be frustrated and unhappy because his expectations never paid off. And you are living your life based upon those expectations. That's called dependency. And it's a terrible way to live, yeah.
Well, with with the people that come in and that seek with desperation to be responsible and own their mistakes that they've made in their life.
Yes.
What about the overdoer? You know, that it talks about in the book that looks at his mistakes he makes and owning responsibility for the mistakes he makes in his life. Thereafter, trying to get sober lets them take away from his sobriety, his serenity. That's something that I struggle with, is that in my desperation to be a responsible adult or own my mistakes, that when I do make one, I let it incapacitate me in a way that takes away from what I've been doing or
Yeah.
what I'm doing.
That's very understandable. And what you are postulating for us is one of the tragic mistakes that's made today. You see, you don't own your mistakes. You know what you do with them? One thing only: you learn from them. It's a huge difference. There is no, we are not, in AA and working the 12-step program, we do not tell you that you must ascribe to your mistakes any moral values. We're not making those judgments. We're not making a judgment of bad or good. What we're doing is saying, when you do your 4th and 5th step, Brian, see what didn't work. And then, Brian, start doing what will work, and your whole life will change. The big book says we let God be the final judge. We don't make those judgments here. And the whole concept of owning my mistakes is balderdash. You understand why? Why, it cripples you. Why the hell would you want to spend your time living back there in the past with your mistakes because somebody told you you're supposed to own them? That's nonsense, and it's damaging. It's a killer, because it's making you live in an unreal world which doesn't exist for you today. See, your purpose today is find out what your present reality is so you can deal with it and move on from there. Does that make sense to you?
It does. I lose it in the fact that when I repeat mistakes.
Well, sure, that's what we just got through talking about. Find out what didn't work and stop doing it. Yes, dear.
I guess I get a little confused on the difference between, owning my mistake and being aware of it, and then that final step, which is changing the behavior. And is that kind of where the do the opposite of what you normally do comes in? Or?
Well, no, because you're missing the real first step. The real first step is to find out what didn't work that led to the failure. Not about the failure itself. The failure, all it does is give you a guidepost to look at it. And all the questions in the 4th step lead to that. So that what you're really finding out is what were your actions that led to your failures. You see? Because everything in the 12 steps has to do with the actions we take. None of it has anything to do with our state of mind. And that's one of the huge mistakes the human solutionists make, that somehow or another our state of mind controls what we do. That's nonsense. It does not. You see, state of mind in the sense of emotions, of the momentary angers and fears and all that. Our state of mind in the sense of our minds being twisted and perverted by fear, yes. But those are the defects of character. And you see, here's the problem. We can't get rid of those things ourselves. That's why we have to take them to God. We learn about them in the 4th step, admit them in the 5th step, and take them to God in the 7th step. And only He can take them away. Until we understand that, we're fighting a battle that we cannot win. Yes?
Is that why I'm starting to understand the act your way into thinking instead of think your way into acting?
Well, that's exactly right, because you
I
see,
used to do it backwards.
it is backwards, and it sounds like a paradox, but it's not. It's the truth. It's the reality is that thought follows action. All of our steps are based on that. You take right action, then you get right thinking. Look at the progression from the 4th to the 5th to the 7th step. What do? We take the action to find out what's wrong with us. We take the action to admit what's wrong with us. Then we take it to God. First, we have to take the action. We have to do what we can do, and then God does what He promises. And everything in our steps revolves around that one idea. We do what we're supposed to do, what we can do. Then God will always do what He promises. Everything has to do with action. Look at the names of the steps, how it works. Into action, working with others. It all has to do with the actions we take. Until we understand that, we get mired off here in this psychobabble, which has no relevance whatsoever to somebody who is spiritually sick. Because the spiritual illness can only be remedied by a spiritual program of action. And that's what the 12 steps are. Bottom of page 133. A little bit of history of this paragraph before we get into it. Remember that this book was written in 1939, 1940, and that this paragraph was written at that time. And to the best of medical knowledge at that time, it was perhaps accurate. But there was a serious problem with what is stated here. It's not only serious, but in some instances can prove deadly. At the time that this was written, they didn't know. And there is a problem with us. Not all of us, but many of us. That alcohol, the action of alcohol on our internal organs, and especially upon our pancreas, can be very severe. The pancreas is the organ which contains within it the aisles of Langerhans. The aisles of Langerhans produce insulin. And insulin is used to balance our blood sugar. It takes an infusion of carbohydrates will trigger the release of a certain measured amount of insulin. The idea being that somehow or another the body is going to regulate the blood sugar and the amount of blood sugar which will eventually reach the brain. And so, if we injure the aisles of Langerhans and the pancreas, what usually happens is not that we become diabetics, that in other words that we stifle the flow of insulin, but that rather that the aisles of Langerhans are supersensitized, which means that the ingestion of carbohydrates, especially in the raw form of sugar, will trigger an insulin response far in excess of the amount of insulin necessary to provide a balance in the blood sugar. Which means that when this occurs, our blood sugar level drops way off. And this condition they call hypoglycemia. And the first notice of the first recognition of hypoglycemia as a recognizable syndrome or symptom appears to not have come until about 1947. At that time, the American Medical Association recognized that this was a severe problem. They'd always been dealing with diabetes, which is high blood sugar, which is the result of there being insufficient flow of insulin to control the intake of carbohydrates, which convert to sugar. Now, there are a number of problems with being the condition of low blood sugar, not the least of which is the fact that our brains live on blood sugar and oxygen. I don't know some people call it glucogen. It doesn't matter. But there must be a sufficient supply of blood sugar in the right concentrations in our blood in order for our brain to stay alive. Because oxygen and this blood sugar are the brain food. Well, naturally, if our brain is deprived of sufficient amounts of blood sugar, it begins to die. And when that begins to happen, all sorts of weird things happen to us. For example, depression, and it can hit almost instantaneously. Hyperventilation, we begin to pant. Arrhythmia, our hearts begin to go crazy. Night sweats are very common. And all these things may or may not, but for the alcoholic, we need to look first to see if these are the symptoms of low blood sugar. Well, now, going through all of this, then let's see what would be the purpose of loading up with chocolates and other sweets every time we begin to feel low.
So our pancreas doesn't release.
Pardon?
So our pancreas doesn't release to our bodies. I don't know.
Well, I'm gonna try to follow this through so everybody understands. The pancreas is super sensitized to the infusion of carbohydrates into our system, especially sugars. And that means that it overproduces or oversecretes insulin, so that we feel good for a short time, having taken a lot of sugar in, gets our blood sugar level back out, and then we crash. Because the insulin has been overproduced and overinfused into our system, and it drives our blood sugar way down. And so there's this thing of bouncing back and forth, boom, 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 boom. And this is a very serious problem for alcoholics because, among other things, in our drinking careers, when we began to feel this, we knew that a drink would work. Take a drink, you get an infusion immediately of blood sugar, which raises your blood sugar level, you begin to feel better, and the alcohol masks the symptoms. So now we start talking about how difficult it is to detox off of alcohol, how difficult it is to quiet the craving. And the craving may be mainly a physical one, although we know that it's also mental, psychological, and a lot of other things. But even worse than that, for alcoholics in AA, is that caffeine is an even bigger villain, because caffeine stimulates production of insulin. So now we have newcomers coming in, we say drink lots of coffee and eat lots of chocolate. It's exactly the opposite of what they ought to be doing. And so there's a very simple answer to this. We first recognize that we are omnivores, that we are neither herbivores or carnivores. Omnivores need to have something in their stomachs, but they don't graze all day and chew their cud. On the other hand, we don't stuff ourselves 3 days for a night and then go 3 days without eating, or even a day. Our systems require that we have some food that our system is working on, and that it not be loaded with carbohydrates. And so what really works, if you by any chance having this kind of a problem I've just described, one solution is to go to your doctor and have a 6-hour glucose tolerance test, which usually is fairly accurate to tell you if you've got this problem. If you want to find out for yourself, start eating 6 small meals every day. Small meals. Stay away from carbohydrates and no caffeine. Now, I've been around here for over 38 years. I had my last cup of coffee over 38 years ago. I don't drink coffee. I don't drink caffeine in any form. I don't drink. A Coca-Cola would probably make me pass out. Because do you know what's in a Coke? There's 4 cups of coffee equivalent in caffeine, and 7 teaspoons of sugar in a standard Coca-Cola. You imagine that? And you can wonder why people become addicted to those things. You remember 1907 when they outlawed the cocaine that was being infused into Coca-Cola? What did they do to supplant cocaine? They loaded it up with caffeine. Yes, dear?
How come then in the detox centers they won't serve you coffee, but you can have all the soda you want?
I haven't any idea. I don't know why those birds do what they do.
Maybe some money back.
Well, you see, here's the thing. Caffeine is an obvious villain, isn't it? Because caffeine has a direct, automatic, immediate influence on the pancreas. It's going to stimulate production of insulin just like that, as soon as it hits. Sugar acts a little bit slower. And I suppose an awful lot of the soft drinks now are sugar-free. A lot of them are caffeine-free. Well, that stuff is, I mean, as far as hypoglycemia is concerned, you might as well be drinking water. And, because that's not what we're talking about, but to load a newcomer up on candy, especially chocolate, because chocolate's full of caffeine. Chocolate candy and caffeine, we wonder why they're bouncing around like a rubber ball. Their blood sugar's bouncing up and down. They're having a hell of a time staying sober because their body's crying out. See, it's Pavlovian. They know that if they take a drink, they're going to feel better, and almost immediately. And it's hard to explain. We'd like to explain it away as just being part of the disease, but it's not necessarily true. It may very well be that their real problem is that they're not eating right. And it's one thing we do not let newcomers do is starve themselves. And you know, it's a funny thing about this stuff. If you will eat 6 small meals a day, especially important to eat before you go to bed. Something doesn't have to be a lot, but remembering that while we're sleeping, we are fasting. And when we get up, the first thing we do, and I still have the habit of doing it, I get orange juice. And you may say, well, that's got sugar in it. Yes, but there seems to be a difference in natural sugars or fruit sugars as opposed to the refined sugar in terms of how quickly it acts and how severe the response is. For me, a little orange juice and within 20 minutes I feel like eating. So one of the symptoms of hypoglycemia is that we don't feel like eating. We want candy. We'll drink a bunch of coffee with sugar and creamer in it, but we don't feel like eating. And so one of the things we have to do is kind of cater to our bodies and baby them along, but to make sure that we get some food in us. If you take 3 days and you eat 6 small meals a day, high protein, low carbohydrate, in that 3 days you'll start to feel so much better it'll scare you. If you're hypoglycemic, you will find out within 3 days whether that's what you must do. Now, I was on that diet for 5 years before I finally began to be able to tolerate a little sugar here and there. And I don't know what this is. It's wonderful. Some kind of bread with a little sugar in it, I think. Is that right? I don't know. Anyway. But I can tolerate some now. But I still, if you'll notice, when I'm up here, I have a glass of water. I've been drinking water since I've been sober. And people say, you're nuts. You know what? I almost never drink anything but water. Not tons of it, but enough. It's something to sip on. Most of us, you know, what we really want is something there that we can get our hand around and just sip on it. I don't think most of us like coffee that much, but you don't go to an AA meeting without tons of coffee. If you got to drink coffee, please, especially if you're new, grab the decaf cup, and not the stuff with caffeine in it, because it's very, very, very likely that you have damaged your pancreas. Now, I don't know if that's a full enough explanation. If anybody that doesn't see the relationship there, anybody have any questions about it?
I learned from some of my readings and stuff about the relationship of drinking alcohol and stimulation of serotonin in the brain.
Oh, yeah.
Creating the dopamine, which especially using cocaine and large amounts of alcohol, create an artificial new level of serotonin and dopamine, which has to be fulfilled, or else we then have a crash. And that made a lot of sense to me. I was curious what your opinion of that was.
I really don't know. Obviously I'm not a doctor. I made a study of hypoglycemia because I was afflicted with it. And what I'm saying to you about that is what I learned and what I've experienced. I've heard about this other stuff, but I don't have any idea how it works. And what you say sounds reasonable. I'm sure there's an awful lot going on in our bodies that is critical to how we feel and how we develop. I'm also pretty certain that whatever it is that's wrong with us straightens out when we straighten out spiritually. because I watched that happen over and over again. And it may be that much of what we struggle with, we just take it a little bit easy and concentrate on our spiritual development. We'll find that most of the stuff clears up.
You know, my doctors told me that that's the reason they subscribe Wellbutrin for people who are getting sober, and also for people who are trying to stop smoking. That artificially increases that serotonin level in the brain, which enables you to have less dependency on the nicotine and the alcohol.
Yeah.
And the cocaine.
Yeah. Well, you see, the problem I have with that is that, are we substituting one crutch for another? Is this something we're going to need to be on the rest of our lives in order to assure ourselves that we have the proper level in our brain? And I'm wondering if we want to go that route. That would be my concern. I'm not here to tell anybody they're not supposed to do it one way or another. If you've got a doctor who knows what they're doing, fine. But I would also strongly suggest that if you have any doubts about it, you get a second opinion, and you go slow with it. Because anything that we do which goes beyond the natural responses of our body to natural influences, natural food, natural air, water, and so forth, I believe to be suspect, and we need to be real careful of it. And you know, it's not a question in my mind whether something is addictive in quotes, being an addictive substance, because of the nature, just its physical properties as they work on us. But we are people who tend to get addicted to anything which we feel is going to make us feel good. And after a while, we get so we're totally dependent on it. And I'd hate to see that happen. Maybe it's necessary in some cases, and I certainly wouldn't pass any judgment on that. Well, thanks for sharing that. I don't know, maybe you guys know a lot about that. I don't. So anyway, let's take a look here and see what this doctor said, and then we can make up our own minds. Again, remembering that this was written at a time when this business of hypoglycemia was not accepted. Down at bottom, page 133, one of the many doctors who had the opportunity of reading this book in manuscript form told us that the use of sweets was often helpful, of course, depending upon a doctor's advice. That's always the out clause. And all of these drugs, you know, everything that's out there now being advertised so heavily, you got to see a doctor first. You know, you got to get doctor's advice about this. Don't take our word for it. That comes just before they tell you, in the next 45 seconds, all of the things that could happen to you by taking it. What do they call those, contraindications or something? I don't know. He thought all alcoholics should constantly have chocolate available for its quick energy value at times of fatigue. He added that occasionally in the night a vague craving arose, which would be satisfied by candy. Well, he's obviously not an alcoholic. What the hell is this vague craving? We don't have those things. Our brain is saying, take a drink, and we're saying, yes, sir. Many of us have noticed a tendency to eat sweets and have found this practice beneficial. God, we love to indulge ourselves in sweet stuff. Who wouldn't? Anyway, Bill, I'm sorry, but you're off base there, son. But he didn't know any better, so I guess we have to pass over that. It's not a lie, you know. Bill didn't lie. But he liked what this guy said, this doctor, because Bill liked it. He loved his candy. Yeah, of course, he was just like us, you know. He was overdo stuff. You know. If it was good, do it more. And the more you do it, the better you feel? No. Now then, we get to this paragraph that everybody came to hear today. When we're doing the 4-step, remember that when we get to sex crimes and the 4-step, then that's when you get a full room. I want to suggest that this paragraph, again, we may want to take it with a little grain of salt, because we know who wrote it. And we know what he said about himself back in his story. Remember what he said? Of course, there was no real infidelity. And I've always been bothered by that word real. What the hell does he mean by there's no real infidelity? And I think he had a great deal of difficulty in a physical sense once he got drunk. Anyway, a word about sex relations. Alcohol is so sexually stimulating to some men that they have overindulged. Overindulged? How do you do that? Wait a minute. Let's see. Overindulged. That's something I never experienced. I don't know what he's talking about. Okay. Couples are occasionally dismayed to find that when drinking is stopped, the man tends to be impotent. Unless the reason is understood, there may be an emotional upset. Some of us have had this experience, only to enjoy, in a few months, a finer intimacy than ever. There should be no hesitancy in consulting a doctor or a psychologist if the condition persists. We do not know of many cases where this difficulty lasted long, and that really bothers me, because I can just imagine these guys are all sitting around discussing their sex lives, you know. Oh, man. What about women? Now, there's a lot of women in here. Is this true of women, that alcohol is so sexually stimulating that you would occasionally overindulge? Anybody want to answer that? Anybody brave enough to answer that? Absolutely. There's a brave soul. Okay. Amazing. You know, why don't we think about it from a little different angle? What is it that would normally hold us back from being aggressive sexually, pursuing somebody aggressively, putting ourselves out there in the marketplace, running off, for example, to a hotel room or something like that? Wouldn't that be fear?
Fear, ego, pride.
Well, what the heck does alcohol do? Does it take away our fear?
Yeah, liquid courage.
Liquid courage. Is that what we're really talking about? Its effective alcohol is to, you know what it does? It's like ether. It's the same chemical, except it has H2O. And what does it affect? It affects the frontal lobes of our brain, doesn't it? And that's where the censor resides. The censor says, oh, you can't do that, and you got to be afraid of doing that. Well, now, when the censor is put to sleep by alcohol, there's nobody there to monitor us or tell us we ought to be afraid. All of a sudden, we got what do they used to call it? Dutch courage. Dutch courage. I don't know where that came from. A Dutch woman can tell us. Dutch courage. It doesn't have anything to do with real courage, does it? What it really means is the absence of fear. If you stop to think about it, guys, remember that first time you drank, or the first or second or third time. Remember the feeling. If you can remember back that far, you remember that the feeling was that suddenly I don't feel afraid anymore. And you know what? Fear is very painful. Very painful. And what is the most exquisite feeling in the world? It's the absence of pain. When pain goes away. Now, what does alcohol do? It takes away the pain of fear. And suddenly we're 10 feet tall, or we're the most beautiful woman ever walked down. Well, many of you are anyway, but you just didn't know it then. We're beautiful, we're handsome, we're witty, we are erudite, we're going to live forever, and the world is our oyster, and anybody who's out there who looks delicious to us is going to She's going to have to answer for that. You know, we're not going to take that. We'll take that line down. You know. And so maybe what we're not really talking about stimulation here. We're really talking about the absence of fear. That would be my guess. I mean, you can call it anything you want, I suppose, but most of us have had the experience of having a few drinks and finding ourselves suddenly involved sexually or in some kind of a flirtation that we wouldn't otherwise do at all. As a matter of fact, I remember that it was the most important reason for going to a bar was not to get drunk, was to chercher la femme. God, there might be just the one there. Wow. And my wife being crazy as hell, and she was nymphomaniac for everybody but me, so I was... I didn't make her that way. That was the package she came in. In any event, I remember what the thought of going to the bar really was. Wow, there may be something exciting there, you know. Even if it's only for a few hours to have some nice-looking woman pay attention to me, for God's sakes. You know, give me a little come. Boy, that would feel good. You know. It was all crazy stuff. We all know that. I mean, this stuff is nuts. But there's no question about it. We're insane as hell. When we walk in that door, we're nuts. We're goofy. And nobody should ever take that away from us. We've been there. I mean, we know what goofy is. And we get to be sane, and sometimes it gets boring as hell being just sane, you know. But that's the way it is. That goes with the territory. You get to be sane. But it's kind of nice when you run into a bunch of other people who are sane, because then you can get crazy again and nobody thinks unkindly of you. So we have some fun. In any event, I would take all of this with a grain of salt. I think I think we need to concentrate in our consideration of what happened to us and what has happened to people we try to help. That the alcohol is that great substance which destroys the fear demon and makes us feel good and gives us the opportunity to do and to be things that we could never do if we were sober.